The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. ALP team, are we ready to start?
Yes, Karishma, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our next online session of the Grid Scale Renewable Energy Community of Practice. My name is Karishma Gokhale Welch, and I am a research, I don't know what I am. I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado. And I, this topic for renewable energy auctions was something that came up as a priority topic to learn more about following the Asia Clean Energy Forum, and then also from other feedback we've received from this group. So this session will focus on understanding how the implementation of renewable energy auctions can accelerate private sector investment, increase cost competitiveness, and spur large-scale renewable energy development. So if we go to the next slide, please, there's an agenda. I'll briefly go through the agenda. After this quick welcome, we'll have a quick round robin of all the participants online, so we know who's online. Just very briefly, your name and what organization you're from. And then we will hear from Tanawat from USAID Clean Power Asia, and he will review the emerging renewable energy auctions trends in Asia, and then move on to providing a deeper understanding of key aspects of auction design, some of the elements, strengths, weaknesses of energy auctions, and then trade-offs. And Barbara O'Neill will help provide some of those basics and key considerations. I will let Tanawat and Barbara introduce themselves before they start their presentation. And then, so this first half of the presentation, everyone will be on mute initially except the presenters. But then the next piece where we'll have opportunity for open discussion, everyone, once that context setting presentations are over, everyone will be unmuted and will have the opportunity to speak and ask questions and interact. We request, if you're not speaking, to please place yourself on mute so there's no disturbance and feedback, and so we're able to hear the person speaking clearly. You are welcome to type any questions or comments, feedback that you have in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And then if you'd like to download the presentation, there's also the handout button, the handouts button. If you can click there, you're able to download. So with that, I will hand it off to Nikhil from the Asia-led partnership to sort of facilitate this round robin country participation introductions. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Karishma. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are glad that you could take out time from your schedules. So we'll just go through quickly and do a round robin. So if you could just introduce yourself, the organization that you're from, and just maybe in one line if you're working on anything related to the topic. So we'll start, and you could also, I think you are able to view the list of attendees, other attendees. So we just go alphabetically as it appears. So if we could start with the first one, Chu Cheng Nan, are you there? If you can unmute yourself and just give an introduction. Hello.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chen Chu. I'm from Taiwan. I work for ITRIS, Industry Technology Research Institute, and I also in charge of the Renewable Energy Project Office of Energy Bureau. It's my pleasure to come in the webinar, and I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Moving on to Lau, Ho Ming Lau.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I am Ho Ming Liao. I'm from Taiwan and Department of International Cooperation, Ministry of Economic Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, moving on to Chiang.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Gong Wenjiao, and I'm from Taiwan too. I work at the Renewable Energy Project Office, which is under the Taiwan's Bureau of Energy. And our main task is to assist the Bureau of Energy to promote renewable energy to the public. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Anjan Kumar Sinha. Hello, Mr. Sinha. If you're online, you can just give an introduction.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello, morning,
yeah,
Mr. Sinha.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, Mr. Sinha.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm AK Sinha. I'm working in NTPC and working mainly in the area of renewable energy integration. And I'm in operation and maintenance, looking after strategic issues of NTPC.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Good to have you join again.
Yeah.
Hi, Madhura. Yeah, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Madhura Watanabe from USAID Clean Power Asia. We're a regional program that tries to scale up on-grid renewable energy in the Lower Mekong region. So I work with Tanawat. Okay, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I see you have a colleague on board as well. Hello. Yeah, Methivan.
Hi, my name is Methiwan Getkajai from USAID Clean Power Asia. I am an RE policy and planning specialist.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, Punsara. Thank you for joining us again.
Hello from Sri Lanka. I am Punsara Nagasinghe. I serve for the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka. And I involved in regulatory activities relevant to generation and transmission. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, Supawan. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Supawan. I'm from Bangkok, working as a renewable energy policy specialist at USAID Clean Power Asia.
Thank you. Yeah, Yulia.
Hello, I'm Yulia from Taiwan, and I'm working in International Cooperation Department, which is under the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Republic of China. And it's very honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Karishma has already introduced herself, and yeah, if Anandan and Ritvik, if you could just introduce yourselves.
Hi, myself Anandan. I'm working for Asia Leads Partnership and supporting the communities of practice, various communities of practice, including this grid scale renewable GRE communities of practice and other operations of Asia Leads Partnership. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Ritvik. I work for IGLI South Asia office, and here I represent Asia Leads Partnership Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and Thanawat and Barbara, maybe we can get an introduction from you at the start of your presentation. I hope that's okay.
Nikhil, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Nikhil Kolse Patil. I work with the Asia Leads Partnership, and I'm mainly working with the renewable energy community of practice. And I've been in touch with you and also met some of you at the in-person session. Yeah, and also I'm working with other countries in the Asian region on renewable energy and energy as a topic. Thank you. Thank you, Karishma. I hand it back to you now.
Okay. Actually, now if you'll hand the screen to Thanawat, I think we can start with our first sort of setting the context in Asia. Thanawat, all yours. Thank you.
Hello, sorry, I was in mute mode. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, hello everyone. My name is Thanawat Kiripart. I'm renewable energy policy expert from USAID Clean Power Asia. There's quite a bit of support from my team today in the staff. So the activities we are doing at Clean Power Asia related to auctions, we are doing a lot of renewable energy auctions scaling up, and one of the scaling up portion, we are working to develop an auction, solar pilot auction in Lao PDR at the moment. And today I'm going to present some of the trends and renewable energy auctions. Well, in the agenda it says Asia, but I will touch some of the Asia aspect, but the focus will be in the Southeast Asia portion. So I'm gonna go ahead with the presentation, and just one moment. Okay. Let me introduce our program, USA Clean Power Asia, just for briefly. Our program is a 5-year program funded by USAID, obviously. Starting since June 2016, the program aims to support grid-connected renewable energy in Asia. We do have focus on the lower Mekong countries, which includes Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, and as well as the ASEAN member states, such as the Philippines and potentially maybe including Indonesia. Under this program, there are three main tasks. One is the renewable energy planning, which includes renewable energy target settings and renewable energy zones. Second task is to support public sector for improving policy enabling environments, and the last task is supporting private sector to mobilize investment in renewable energy. If anyone is interested in renewable energy in our program, there's plenty of information available on our website, which is on the bottom of the slide. So today's agenda, we will cover some high levels of renewable energy trends, and then we're going to talk about what's happening in Asia, and then we move to focus on the Southeast Asia recent renewable energy auctions. And we will cover some information on Indonesia, Malaysia, and most of the information presenting in this session is going to be in Thailand, which is the recent auction in Thailand. And lastly, we'll go over some of the under development auctions in Southeast Asia. So for the first agenda, we cover some of the highlights of renewable energy trends. The driving force for the renewable energy trends are the falling cost of renewable energy technology, particularly for solar and wind, and technology improvement and innovations. So the three main highlights for renewable energy global trends are, obviously I mentioned, cost competitiveness, and the second one is moving towards auctions and applications, and the third one is, application of technology to solve intermittency issues, which is the key issues regarding particularly for solar and wind. So the first highlight is as renewable energy power becomes cheaper and more competitive with fossil fuels, we envision that there's going to be a higher share of renewable energy in power generation mix. So most people, if they ask, they will, if they ask like, oh, would you prefer the clean energy or would you prefer the fossil fuels? Of course, they would prefer the clean energy. But then if you tell them like, oh, it's going to cost them so and so much more than the clean energy, I would say probably about 90% of the people, particularly in the developing country, will probably go like, oh, I'm going to go with the cheaper one. So as soon as the clean energy becomes more competitive with the fossil fuels, then we can, shift in that demand towards the general population that are more cost conscious. The second highlight is the transitioning to an auction system from traditional support, such as the feed-in tariff. So most Asian countries started with the FIT or feed-in tariff to subsidize and support the development of renewable energy at early stage. However, with the price technology being reduced so fast, driven by international competition from auctions around the world, there is, I guess, less need for the government to provide subsidies. So particularly in Asia and in more developing countries where they are more limited in terms of the government funding and support. So through proper auction design, we can actually discover the real market price for a particular renewable energy technology. And the third main highlight is the renewable energy technologies are now starting to overcome the key issues of intermittencies. This is not as important when you have a lower level of renewable energy penetration or variable renewable energy penetration. But at the high level of GRE penetration, does become a critical issue to deal with. So with new innovation, this is now possible even for utility scale level generation. Some countries are also, starting to consider policies to have, procure some energy from renewable energy, GRE energy that is hybrid, that also address some of these intermittency issues. So for the next slide, this slide, I'm going to discuss on some of the policy supporting mechanism for renewable energy. One way to promote and support renewable energy is policy. At least 126 countries promote renewable energy through policy support. Supporting policies in the renewable energy sector includes, as I mentioned previously, feed-in policies, auctions, and there's other policies such as net metering, tax incentives, and loan financial support, tradable renewable energy credits, so on and so forth, depending on the viability of each policy in each country. So the most popular one still in the world is still feed-in policies. The feed-in tariff or the feed-in policies are being used in 83 countries around the world in 2016. But however, the trend here is that the feed-in policies are on the decline, meaning there's not that much development or introduction of feed-in policies anymore as much as the next policy mechanism, which is auction. So so for auctions, the trend has been, previously not so popular, but now with the declining price, it becomes a bit more, popular, and people are moving towards more auction. So it's a trend that is increasing in the opposite direction of the feed-in policy. So more countries now are developing auctions. In 2016, 16 countries and are developing, the auction policies, and the auction is becoming a preferred policy tools. With 34 countries issued new tenders in 2016. So that is the supporting policies for renewable energy. And we will show you, well, actually, in the next slide, I will show you the trend in which explaining why the auction is becoming more popular. The main reason is the price. So if you can see some of these slides, there is the price trend in the auction for solar and wind, onshore wind. On the slide on the top portion, you can see like the trends are moving towards, as we move from 2000 to 2016, the price are dropping in terms of dollars per megawatt hours. So in many of the countries, you can see a huge drop in price, particularly in like South Africa, India, and Peru. Some countries, more developed countries, are also experiencing a decline in price from the auction. Even in United States also are experiencing a decline in price for solar PV. Similarly, for wind, there's also been a pretty steep decline in price, such as Italy, South Africa, and possibly, a more recent development in South America, like Chile. These countries are experiencing a lot of decline in price through auctions. However, this depends on the country-specific conditions, depend on the country risk, depend on the supporting mechanism, depend on the investor confidence, and also depends on auction design. The next item on the agenda, I will take a look at the renewable energy auctions in Asia as a whole. So this is a summary of what's going on in Asia, starting with, I guess, China and India, and they're the two largest, contribution in renewable energy in Asia, with China having renewable energy auctions of 1 gigawatt in 2015 and 5.5 gigawatts in 2016. And of course, India, I'm not sure I have the latest information, but I guess Karishma and maybe Nikhil and those folks in India can provide me more updates on what's going on in India. But in 2015, we have a solar auctions of 1.8 gigawatts. In 2016, 2017, we have 3.7 gigawatts and 6.7 gigawatts, respectively. So that's actually, if you compare India to China, auction is even more prevalent in India than China. So in other areas, we will go more in details, particularly in Thailand, Laos, and Malaysia, and Indonesia. We'll go into more details later. But I would like to touch base a little bit on the Lao PDR portion. This is the country where USA Clean Power Asia is providing support to develop a solar pilot auction, hopefully soon to be implemented in early 2020. So, and in Cambodia, there's going to be in development for a 10 megawatt solar in 2016, but we're not sure on the updates on that yet. So now we are looking towards the more focused Southeast Asia. But before we go into the auctions, let's take a look at what's going on in renewable energy in Southeast Asia. If you look at this slide, you can see that from 2013 to 2017, the renewable energy is increasing regardless of the type. But however, the largest increase, the steepest curve on this graph, is the solar PV. For Southeast Asia, the country with the largest contribution to renewable energy is Thailand, followed by Malaysia and the Philippines. So the driving force for this increase in renewable energy is the FIT policy. And with rapid technological advancement and cost reduction in solar and wind, a lot of these countries are transitioning from the FIT to auctions. So also the solar rooftop installation for self-consumptions are becoming more popular, particularly for Thailand as well as the Philippines. Well, this slide summarizes some of the targets, incentive, and auctions in ASEAN. So as you can see, these across from the horizontal, the columns are representing some of these policy support for renewable energy. And there's only few countries that has all the support on all of them. One of them is Thailand, with the only missing item being the tradable renewable energy credits. Another country that has a lot of policy support is Indonesia and Malaysia. So these are just like a summary of the countries in ASEAN that what kind of policy is available to support the renewable energy. And now we are focusing more on the Southeast Asia, country by country, but focusing in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. In Indonesia, the recent auctions was initiated as in June 2017. The total to add was 168 megawatts of solar power on the island of Sumatra. There seems to be quite a bit of interest that attract participants in this auction, with 100 parties being interested in participating. The ceiling of the tariff was set at 85% of local generation costs. Let me elaborate a little bit further on what it means by the term local generation costs. Since Indonesia is an island nation, and in different areas, different islands, they have a different costs for electricity generation. So for an area that's a little bit more secluded, a little bit far off, the higher there will be the local generation cost for the electricity will be higher. So for this auction that was in Indonesia, the net prices was range from about 6 cents to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The latest update that we have was that the bids were expected to be selected by late 2017, but not yet have been announced. I do not have the most recent information, but we do have a program in Indonesia that possibly can provide a more updated information to us if anybody is interested. So moving from Indonesia, we have Malaysia. In Malaysia, we have a first solar auction in 2016, and the second one in 2017. In Malaysia, we have a lot of interest, so all of the auctions were heavily oversubscribed. The first auction was targeted at 300 megawatts, but the ending bids representing 450 megawatts of total capacity. Similarly, with the second auction, from 460 megawatt target, but the total bids representing 563 megawatts. So there's a lot of interest in people, participating in the auction in Malaysia. And the policy and the results in Malaysia is that the two competitive tenders were conducted under the large-scale solar program in the peninsula of Malaysia, Sabah and Luban. The new energy minister is committed to increase the renewable energy capacity to 20% of all power generation by 2025. Speaking of which, in the recent election in Malaysia in May 2018, the newly appointed Minister of Energy, Technology, Science, Climate Change and Environment, Mr. Yeo Yin, he did emphasize the commitment of the new government to mitigate climate change, including through increasing renewable energy, and also he canceled the IPP contract that has been awarded under the previous administration through direct negotiation. So he emphasized that all power procurements from now on will be towards competitive bidding. So that actually strengthened the trend of more auctions in Malaysia. The price that was announced in Malaysia was between 8 cents to 12 cents kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour. The winning project is required to be in operations next year in 2020. So for the recent auctions in Thailand, we had a biomass and biogas auction in 2016, and of course, the first technology-neutral hybrid firm auction in 2017. So in 2017 hybrid firm auction, the target was set at 300 megawatts, and the bids were selected in December 2017, and the PPA will be signed by December of 2019. So there are some recent government announcements that may result in some uncertainty of potential delays related to future RE procurement. However, this is, in normal ministerial auctions, is nothing is yet cleared, and if there's change in the people in power, the policy also changes. So who knows? We may have additional auctions in Thailand in the future, but as of now, we have no definitive, upcoming auction yet. So in Thailand, the policy for the auction was to increase security power of the system, reduce the variation of intermittency, and reduce the dependency on single renewable energy. The hybrid program, or it was in Thailand, the auctions for the small power producer hybrid program was the first that requires firm power. I will get into what it means by firm power in a bit later. And before you understand the firm power, you have to understand that there is a peak hours and an off-peak hours condition within this auction criteria. The peak hours in Thailand is between 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Friday, and the rest is off-peak. For the firm aspect of the powers, they must have the generation capacity at 100% of total capacity in order to qualify as a firm power. So the result of the hybrid auction in Thailand was that of 300 megawatts announced target, 17 winning bids was announced in December 2017, and 14 of those are biomass project. We also have one biogas plus solar, and one biomass plus solar, and also one solar plus energy storage project. So the price range approximately from 6 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Allow me to go over some of the observations and the private sector's feedback on the recent auction in Thailand. There's a lot of competition. We have a lot of participation due to initial attractive opening bid price, but however, the price fell by significantly, like 45% due to competition. And the partial reason for that is that biomass from sugar mills were proposed project that would likely to be implemented anyway, even though they're not winning the bid. That will push the price down further. And some of the feedback is related to the firm aspect of it. There were some suggestions that the Thai government should consider a more creative ways to define firm power. So the firm power, as I mentioned, is delivering a block of power during the peak hours of 100%. So some suggestions were proposed to be delivering firm means equivalent to dispatchable. So as long as they're highly dispatchable, then should be able to consider firm. However, this is being under consideration, but not yet pushed forward with this terminology of the firm. So also there is, if you notice, there's a lot of biomass, despite the fact that this is a hybrid firm auction. So if you want to encourage participation from solar and wind, maybe a separate auction for different technologies may be used in that case. And also there were some suggestions that they need to have an improvement in grid access interconnections to help the private sector to develop a power sector and connect it to the grid. I'm just going to go over this very briefly. This is how the solar and energy storage are delivering firm energy in accordance with the requirements of the Thailand auction. The area under the rectangle portion is under the firm period. Those are the one that is being delivered within the grid. So initially the battery will be charging by 9 a.m. Then the project is delivering about 12 megawatts to the grid as a firm power. And then even though when the sun sets around 6 p.m. or so, there's still some remaining power stored in the energy storage, and this power is being sold back to the grid as required under the firm aspect of the PPA. So I'm just going to go briefly over the Thai policy objective for further consideration. Maybe in Thailand, the firm power requirement may not be viewed as the only solution, because it's not the most optimal, and it does not address all the challenges that occur with increasing RE penetrations. And also additional measures to enhance power security, such as improving the transmission system, interconnections, balancing areas, improve the existing plants capabilities. Those can be addressed in order to help in strengthening the security, the power system security in Thailand. And for the policy number 2 is to reduce the variation in intermittent energy sources. If in Thailand they dispatch the renewable energy as a system as a whole instead of merit-based or firm-based dispatch, there's a more optimal way of managing and reducing the variability by taking advantage of renewable energy plant over a wide geographic area. And also, as I mentioned previously, in order to increase the GRE penetration level and reduce the intermittent problem, some of the power plants can be adjusted or improved by having an increased ramp-up time and reduce the minimum load in order to support a more renewable energy in the grid. The last one is in the condition of auctions in the hybrid. Maybe we need to address that instead of having a criteria of one or more technology. If we want to support the policy of hybrid, we should address something like 2 or more technology. So the biomass project may not be as attractive to participate in that criteria. And we can promote more wind and solar in that case. The last section is I'm going to go over some of the auctions under development in Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, as I mentioned previously, ADB supported the Ministry of Mines and Energy for developing a solar auction for 10 megawatts. In Vietnam, the World Bank is currently supporting the Ministry of Energy on Industry and Trade for solar auctions. And the current FIT program is soon to expire next year in June. And new incentives are being considered. And in Lao PDR, our program, USA Clean Power Asia, is supporting Ministry of Energy and Mines to do the solar pilot auctions, which is complementing a generation from hydro and also reduce energy imports from neighboring countries. That's it for me. Thank you very much. And hopefully I'm not taking too long for everybody's time.
Thank you very much, Tanawat. Just a quick announcement before we hand off to Barbara. The questions box does not seem to be working for some reason. So if you have any questions or comments, please type into the chat box and then we'll pick it up from there. Thank you. And then Barbara, you can take it away. ALP team, if you want to share Barbara's slides, that would be great. Barbara, you may have to unmute yourself, but feel free to start.
Thanks, Karishma. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I love that. So let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk more about the specifics. Tanawat did a great job of presenting sort of, the current state of affairs with auctions, and it's so exciting to see these vehicles take off in so many places around the world, because in my experience, it really has driven the prices down. And so, relative to, say, feed-in tariffs, it seems like auctions, depending on specific circumstances, are a really good bet to what I call not leaving money on the table. But of course, there's many considerations. So I'm going to very quickly go through many of those, characteristics of auction, including how it's structured and designed, and then dig into the contract terms a little bit. Okay, starting with the next slide there. Let me just give you a quick intro to myself. Someone's going to help me. There we go. Perfect. So I'm working, like Karishma, for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. That's a U.S. Department of Energy facility, and I'm doing grid integration generally there, along with, we wear many hats, along with many other sort of subjects as they come up, including auctions, including storage. Lately, there's been a whole lot of talk about that, including RPS, for example. I'll be working in Vietnam on RPS through USAID. So before I worked for NREL, and I've been there for about 5 years, I was a developer, and I was actually what I call greenfielding sites, or going out and finding sites to build wind and solar utility scale plants, or at least, half bake them, right? So you put the cake in the oven and you just leave it in for half the time. So what I mean by that is getting them all set up such that if there was a solicitation and we were to win the solicitation, then we can move forward building the project. And so, as a developer, we looked at land securitization, we looked at interconnection process and sort of getting in line for connecting to the grid. We looked at environmental permits. We looked at all sorts of things related to the project site. Before that, I was working with a utility here in the US. It's called Xcel Energy, and it is one of the largest gas and electric utilities in the US and the largest buyer of wind power, and has operations in maybe 10 states, but it's headquartered in Minnesota and has a second headquarter in Colorado, where we are here. So I was working on the other side of the table, the other side of the negotiating table, basically figuring out how to make a win-win situation via a purchase power agreement with the developers who were interested in selling us projects. And with that, I did solar and wind, as well as a little bit of small hydro, small waste energy plants, and that sort of thing. So that's my background. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide and kind of dig in. The next slide shows an outline of what we're going to cover. So you can see it is quite a bit for this amount of time. So I'm going to go relatively fast, and we can follow up with a good question and answer and discussion session. So go ahead, move forward, please. And there's probably a delay. There's some latency on the internet probably before I even see you change the slide, so I could just start talking. Okay, so the first point is that we want to figure out what are the main objectives of typically, the Ministry or Bureau of Energy, sort of the government authority on energy matters. What are the priorities for the country, and what are the values? What is it that you want to create? Is it racing to meet some target? Is it bringing local economic development to your country? Is it making sure that you get the lowest bargain basement price you possibly can? Is it making sure that there's a schedule that's adhered to in terms of constructing the project and bringing it commercial? All of that will play into how decisions are made to figure out the best way to structure the auction. So you want to pull the stakeholders into the room, right? You want to talk to not just the government and the regulator, and the utility, right? The distribution companies or system operators, but also the private sector, and figure out who's interested in participating in this. What sort of local development interest is there, and what are their main issues as well. So make sure you start that early and get the conversation going, make it transparent. It will pay off in the end. Next slide, please. So one of the big issues you want to think about is the schedule and the frequency. And so there's a couple angles to this. By schedule, I mean, how specifically are you announcing them? And I say them because I highly recommend holding more than one auction and making it public in advance that you are going to hold more than one auction. So you figure out, okay, if I'm going to hold more than one, how far apart in time will they be? Will they be every year, every 6 months? I mean, you could even go every quarter, but that's a whole lot of work. How long? What is the duration? So the frequency and the schedule should be considered and announced in advance. The reason being, I mean, the most obvious benefit to this is that the prices will come down with subsequent auctions. We've seen that in many, many countries. And, you know, there's sort of obvious reasons for that have to do with risk, right? And for those who are just you know, dipping their toe into the water of this country with some foreign direct investment, there's a whole lot of uncertainty with respect to country risk. So political risk, regulatory risk, counterparty risk, and we'll talk a bit more about those later on. So they're going to, you know, sort of fatten their prices to account for some of these unknowns and these uncertainties. And as the auctions proceed and things actually happen as they were supposed to happen, and there's transparency and there's, you know, folks getting comfortable doing legal agreements with other counterparties, the prices will get down. You'll also get more parties interested, so more bids will come in over time. It's also going to be easier to administer. It's the first one's going to be the hardest, trying to figure out how to process the bids, how to, you know, make sure that they stay confidential if that's what the decision is. I actually, you know, do know of some auctions where the entire, you know, completely open coat, like under your, you know, your coat, everything that you submit is completely public. So that's been used, but typically these are sealed documents. And you also want to make sure you allow enough time for responses. So you have to figure out if you're announcing, oh, we're launching an auction, your bids are due, you know, in a month. Well, that's fine if everyone knows in advance that it's going to happen and they've gotten all of their project development aspects sort of lined up to be able to respond. Typically that's not the case. So you want to give enough time for the responses to come in, and you want to announce the auction enough time in advance so that developers can go out and figure out what projects they're going to be bidding in. This is with the understanding that they will find their own project sites, but in some countries, the utility itself will set up the specific location and say, okay, here's the land, here's the connection that's going on in Kazakhstan right now, you know, go ahead and bid, but it sort of normalizes it for all the participants because it's apples to apples on those assumptions on what it's going to cost to secure the site. Okay, next slide, please. So the next thing we want to figure out is, and I'm saying next, but truly these are not in that kind of subsequent order, but figuring out who the contract will be between is key. If a developer wins an auction, are they signing a purchase power agreement with one institution, such as a clearinghouse or some kind of, you know, brokerage who will actually take the financial obligation to get them paid? Or are they signing it with a specific distribution company, a utility who is going to be the ultimate retail seller of that power that's coming off of that project? Or if it's too hard to match up a project size with a demand from a distribution company, you know, even with multiple projects winning an auction, you can create a pool, right? So a pool of projects that have won, and then have various distribution companies create a contract with the pool. So it's pretty complicated legally. You can create, you know, quite a voluminous legal matrix to make sure that every institution who's buying has a contract in place with every party who's selling, but it is a possibility. Otherwise, somebody's got to take that financial obligation. And you want to make sure whoever does take that financial obligation to pay for the power has some credit worthiness, right? Otherwise, we'll be paying for that in higher rates. So this individualized mapping is a possibility. Contracts against the pool is a possibility. You can do a contract against the pool with the premium payment. Basically, look at what the real price is, and say, okay, to the renewable energy providers, the sellers, if you aren't making enough money based on what the market is doing, then you'll get a premium on top of that to account for winning this auction. And then an option 4, off-taker of last resort, that can be a vehicle where you're trying to match up buyers and sellers, but if there were some kind of default by a seller, for example, the government would step in and be an off-taker of last resort in the UK. And I'm not sure that's even in existence anymore, but certainly in nascent markets, it's helpful to have some assurance to the project financiers, the banks, that someone will ultimately be on the hook for buying that power. Okay, next slide. Okay, volume. So when I was working at Excel and we were running RFPs, requests for proposals, or basic solicitations, we would decide based on our own resource plan, our own supply and demand assessment, how many, and it was typically like hundreds of megawatts we wanted. So okay, we want to do an auction for 200 megawatts, but it was a capacity number, and would have everybody bid into that, and then they could bid a subset of that, and we could sort of patch things together and maybe go a little over and get approval from a regulator to do so. But that was because it was a specific target that we were trying to meet. In some cases, the auction volume is hard to determine by the government energy representatives because they're not sure. It depends on the price, say, right? It depends on the price. So one way to figure out how much to contract for is to do to create basically a supply curve by putting out either auctions in multiple rounds where you get a sense of what could be provided at what price level, or you could even do a request for information, an RFI, ahead of the actual auction. But someone needs to decide the volume, and maybe the regulator, it may be a Ministry of Energy, some sort of planning authority, or like I described earlier, it could be the specific resellers of power, so the retailers, whether they're distribution companies or some kind of retail provider, could be just one main utility, how much they want to buy. And whether if it's one state-owned utility and they know how much they want, then that's sort of the easiest way, right, of a vertically integrated structure. But if it's independent distribution companies, then perhaps you're aggregating the amounts that they want to buy in order to determine what the auction volume looks like. So in terms of megawatts or megawatt hours, that goes hand in hand with, well, what are you trying to guarantee? Are you going to guarantee to a project that we're going to buy everything you put out, so a sort of take or pay contract? And this is leaving curtailment aside and leaving congestion issues aside, but saying I'm going to promise you that I'm going to buy everything that your plant can produce. And back when I was doing this, and I mean, I was doing this back in like 2004, 2005 at the start for Excel, at that point it was pretty new. So you wanted the bidders to bid in a reasonable amount. So we wanted to see their 8760, so their hourly estimation of the likely production of power in a typical meteorological year. So a typical weather year, 8760, and this is what I would call a P50. So a probability at 50%. So I've got a 50% probability that it will be lower or higher than this amount. And that was the way to kind of estimate what it would likely show up on our system, understanding that it could go higher or lower. Well, you know, now as things have matured, it's almost easier for government to get more specific about what they want. So that might be in the form of energy instead of just auctioning a capacity. When you do an auction for energy for a certain megawatt hour number instead of a megawatt number, then you are going to pay a premium. In other words, you're not pulling all the money off the table. If you want the lowest price, then you would assure a project financier that I, the buyer, will buy everything out of that plant. If you are worried more about how it's going to fit into your power needs so that you don't overcharge the ratepayers for excess power that they're not needing, then the project developer will bid in something that you know, basically gets him whole to pay off the bank based on the megawatt hours that this project's bidding in, with the understanding that anything that they produce on top of that needs to get sold to a spot market if it exists, or, you know, depending on the liquidity of the country and their electric markets, or, you know, maybe they can have some other bilateral contracts with the corporate procurement, or, you know, there's many different ways, but basically for the lion's share of what they're paying back to the bank, they're going to do it based on the megawatt hours that are committed. So setting up a demand auction in parallel with supply, I sort of already talked about that a bit, where you can build a demand curve in addition to a supply curve to see, in fact, where they meet to really kind of nail the appropriate auction volume. Or you can just do it in, you know, kind of an inquiry structure, a much more informal structure. But if you're letting demand participate in the auction, then you want to know what's the minimum. So if I'm an industrial consumer, can I participate in this auction? Can I commit to buying a piece of the auction volume that is coming in from the sellers? Or is it only, you know, authorized distribution companies? You got to figure out who's allowed to participate. Okay, let's move forward. So along the lines of what we just talked about, you've got your P50s, your P90 contracts, but you also can get even more specific with time blocks, which they're doing now in Chile. So they're auctioning off specific supply blocks on a sort of 24-hour clock. And that will get the system operator in Chile, you know, just the specific power that it wants to make its system work the best. You can also, you know, request a firm block of power. Thanawat showed that in that diagram, you know, where you might have some way of firming it up, either with some storage asset or you know, some other hybrid type plant. You also need to figure out if what you pay the winners will be a pay as bid, which means if it's a sealed bid, their specific price that they're bidding, that's what they get paid if they do in fact win or are among the winners of the auction, or if they get paid at the highest price that clears the market, so that everybody under that last marginal bidder makes a bit of a I don't want to say windfall, because I think it's a perfectly valid way to clear a market, but make some surplus. You can also do multiple rounds so that you can kind of identify what's available at what price and then dial in better to get your quantity desired to match your price. This is called a descending clock auction in some cases. If you go out there and say, okay, here's a max price. Bidders bid in, and you basically you know, see at this top layer of the pricing cake that, you know, that you're willing to take, how many megawatts would be available. And then the next round, you reduce that max price. So you bring that down and say, okay, how many megawatts are available now? And you sort of keep going down until the price that you're willing to pay matches the volume. And then you hold the final round is like a traditional auction where you end up really leaving no money on the table because you get each of the participants, the sellers or the bidders into the auction, the sellers of power, to really dial in what they're willing to provide at that price, and that they're the only ones that are allowed to participate then in that final round. Okay, let's move on. Auction bans. Okay, so there's lots of ways to slice and dice this. Starting with technology, you've got to figure out if you want to do an auction for just for power, right? Whether it be capacity or energy, but that's not specific to renewables. So that's one way that some countries need to do it if they don't have any legislated sort of, you know, authorization to move forward and encourage renewables, or they're not tying it to their Paris Agreement commitments, or, you know, in some cases that is what they need to do. Or you could say, okay, I'm technology neutral to all renewables, or you might exclude some, you know, large hydropower, for example, that's already got a leg up from its history. Or you can do specific solar, specific wind, specific biomass, etc. So you need to figure out what you're trying to encourage. It goes back to the prioritizations. For, or if you need a certain resource mix. If you want to build a local supply chain, you might want to narrow it down to specific technology, because, you know, if an investor sees, especially if there's a future schedule, an investor sees one technology that you're looking for, and here's the schedule of auctions, it will be more inclined to hire workforce and invest in some manufacturing facilities, for example, in order to provide equipment procurement. If it has to be neutral to all technologies, there are other ways to tilt it to renewables, you know, basically by looking at that long-term contract structure. It will benefit renewables. For timing, we need to figure out how to narrow down when you want the project to come on. So if you're looking for, you know, wind plants, you want to allow for 1 to 3 years to get built. Solar can get built a lot faster, hydro a lot longer, and you might want to have some obligation for the winner of the auction to actually meet that construction and commercialization date. So figure out from the developers how much legwork's been done, how long it really takes to get these plants online, and then depending on what your pre-qualification requirements are, you want to announce in your auction documents what the expectations are. So and not many countries do this, and I just find it it's a bit hard for me to understand how they can compare apples to apples when they get all the bids in, if these projects are coming online in such a variety of years, because there's so much uncertainty in the out years that either you're going to pay a premium for that uncertainty, or you're going to not see project realization. And how do you compare one to the other, depending, you know, on some sort of near-term completion expectation versus a long-term one? So I'd say, you know, my recommendation is to narrow down when you want the plant to become commercially operating. Location. So this is something that I think is just seeing some benefits, and, you know, some countries are giving this attention. why not look at where you want this renewable energy plant to be based? Look at the transmission grid, see where congestion is, and then encourage supply to be, favored to where it can help alleviate that. And make sure if you're looking at levelized cost of energy numbers that you have included the expectation for transmission investments. You can also just publicize the best substations to connect to. In Mexico, they're offering sort of these called ex-ante incentives for location. So they're basically running a production cost model and then looking at the locational marginal prices that fall out of that model and saying, okay, we're going to assign a premium or a detractor based on what location you, the bidders, are proposing to connect to. So they just kind of, in a very quantifiable way, weight the give a leg up to the bidders who are proposing to connect in the most beneficial location for the operator. They're actually doing that in combination with with the 24-hour clock, which is quite interesting. Okay, let's move on. Qualitative criteria. So when you're assessing the bids, you need to figure out, what the assessment criteria is. But to set up the auction for success, it's great to have very explicit detail in the bidding documents that tell participants what sort of binding qualifications there are to even partake. If you suggest low material qualifications, then you would probably want a high bid bond. In other words, a high security deposit from a participant. If you go with no material qualifications, you kind of run the risk that you're going to see much speculation or speculators entering the market with bids that might win but will be potentially further off to be realized, because speculators are there to kind of corner a piece of that market and then generally sell off that that winning bid, to sell off their their project to somebody else who might then send it sell it to someone else. So that sort of movement from speculation means that your project could be pushed off further into the future. So you want to just rein that in. Okay, for location specific, there's a typo here, it should be grid impact study. Location specific encouragement, let's go ahead and say, okay, as a pre-qualification, you need to have had a grid impact study, or you need to have a grid connection. Figure out how well baked do you want those projects to be, knowing that the price will go up. You'll get more serious bidders the higher those qualifications are, but with more serious bidders, you also are limiting the competition. I still encourage serious bidders because the ones that have been on the ground doing the legwork to sort of half-bake those projects really have a good feel for that local economy and the likelihood of project realization. Okay, legal. For the companies who are bidding in, what sort of registration to be, say, incorporated in that country or have some documentation proving that they have the right to do business there, disclosure of all their partners, who the parent companies are, and the parents' parents, and the parents' cousins and uncles and grandparents. Doing this sort of disclosure might ultimately prevent collusion, so it's something to consider. Technological, do they need to have figured out their equipment? Do you want to issue project size limitations? Do you want to either restrict manufacturers to some list of approved manufacturers, or even to encourage local content? It's another thing that you can do on the, before anyone's even participated, before any pens have been lifted to write up those bids. Financial strength and health, so you've got to figure out how important is that, and if so, how can you make it quantifiable and objective? Do you look at the company's revenues or their profits or their credit rating or their previous project finance track record? They can figure out before they even bother wasting their time pulling together all these bid documents, what is the minimum that you will consider in terms of that financial health? For assessment criteria, this could go on, but basically I'm talking about things that are potentially not as specifically quantifiable or unbiased. So social impact, do you want to really look at the project and say, what's it going to do in this area of my country? Like, what's it going to do for the local people with respect to, getting revenue from land leases or getting jobs or, encouraging some kind of, local municipal tax. So the social impact of the project could be a really good assessment criteria. Again, you want it to be transparent though. You want to make sure there's confidence in the process. Realization, so by that I mean the probability of it actually moving forward. That's a very valid assessment criteria. And then how it improves the system. So that's another very valid one. Okay, let's move on. So bid bonds. So these are those security deposits. So you want to generally have some kind of financial skin in the game for someone to participate. Then you want to hold them to it so that they sort of don't walk away after winning the auction and that they actually do move forward with the project so that they don't get the bid bond refunded until the project is executed. And therefore you can ensure that serious bidders are the ones to participate and the ones that have financial backing and that sort of thing. But there is a transaction cost associated with that. Letters of credit are typical form of bid bond. In some cases you can say, okay, we'll take a parent guarantee, but then you want to make sure that parent is credit worthy and has some appropriate credit rating, and that can get a little bit sticky. They could provide cash if they've got some deep pockets, but regardless, transaction costs will impact the price that you see. And you might exclude small scale actors. You might exclude some communities who would want to participate or sort of more local participants who don't have the deep pockets. So, figure out which is more important. The entrance being across the board and of any background, of any nationality, etc. Like, let's really open it up. Or is it important to just make sure you get the big players, the ones who can realize the project, who have that history, and is there some balance in the middle? For structuring bid bonds, you probably want to do it as a $1 per kW number, or it could be a % of the estimated total project cost. $1 per kW seems to work just as well as anything. And then you can refund some of those secured finances for the bid bonds as milestones are achieved in terms of project development. And then you might have them pay a completion bond instead. So, okay, we're going to not make you have a bid bond on the front end, but as soon as you win this auction, now you've got to put your money up, and we're going to hold on to this money until you get that project built. But figure out when the bonds are repaid. Is it when the purchase power agreement is signed? Is it when the power is actually produced, or again, does it step down? Next slide, please. Contract length. Okay, so for the cheapest price, generally, you're going to be looking at aligning that contract length with the economic life of the power plant. 20 years is a good example. you might want to go even longer for solar and hydropower, just in terms of, the equipment generally lasts longer as opposed to, something like a wind turbine that's got a bit of more of a moving parts in terms of gear assemblies. Or you can do shorter payment duration. So biomass and waste energy plants, for example, with that higher O&M and higher fuel cost arrangement, that might make more sense. You want to provide some incentive to maintain long-term performance. So a long-term contract does that, and it does get you the lowest price. So that's one thing to consider. But if you do want to make it shorter because you're worried about those contracts being out of the money. So in other words, if renewable energy prices fall through the floor and you're in a 20-year contract and 10 years out, those prices look really expensive and you're like, shoot, wished I had gone ahead and just done a 10-year contract. Well, yeah, you're going to pay a higher price for the first 10 years. You also you're not getting that the hedge that many ratepayers would be looking for against the volatility of fuel prices. And then, the other piece of that is you need to know if there's a wholesale power market on which the seller of power can sell, excess or sell power beyond the term of the contract. All of that will, again, leave less money on the table. If you look at this graph, it's sort of hard to see, but basically the two bars on the right are for solar PV and onshore wind, and the graph represents the ratio of fixed cost to variable cost. So you can see for wind and solar how little the the fixed costs, the variable costs are relative to the fixed costs. In other words, there's so much capital that needs to be invested on the front end of that contract that you want to align the contract length with that. Okay, next slide, please. Contract terms, these can seriously get into the weeds. In interest of time, I'm not going to dig into each of them, but it would be fantastic if you could either reveal some of these terms before you do these bidding documents, or even have a form purchase power agreement that a bidder can read through and sort of bid to. So, definitely the price level of the bid will change based on how much security is required, how much insurance, whether or not there's a mortgage on the projects that is subordinated to the off-taker, were there to be a default, because typically these project companies are limited liability companies, so they could disappear. And so the off-taker might want step-in rights, for example, step-in rights if the project's not being operated according to basic good utility practice. And then there's many contract terms related to grid services or dispatch, forecasting, all that sort of thing. And I'm sure we can cover that in another session. Let's move forward. So the primary concerns of an investor are creditworthiness of the counterparty, currency risk. So I'm generally talking about foreign directs, but regardless, currency risk, because you're not buying these big equipment pieces in local currency, right? So you're paying back the loan for the equipment in some other currency, in dollars and euros, etc. So if you're getting paid by the power purchaser in local currency, currency risk is big. Regulatory risk, what might change for for those bidders who have become sellers in the market? How often did the rules of the game change? How transparent is that process? That will definitely get the financiers more comfortable and lessen the premium that they extract on their interest rate to the project. How is curtailment or congestion risk addressed, or is it compensated? You know, what does that look like in terms of who has the right to force the power to be grounded? And then, of course, political risk of the country. That's always a big one. Next slide, please. Oh, good. I was thinking, I think I'm actually might be at the end. Okay, so sorry, I think I even went over a little bit, but hopefully we'll have some discussion. Handing back the mic.
Thank you, Barbara, for that very informative presentation. I think it went really well hand in hand with Tanawat's presentation. And so, you know, I'd like to give everyone else an opportunity to ask questions, maybe specific to your country or just general questions. That I'm not seeing any specific questions in the chat box. So if I think everyone is unmuted at this point, so if you'd like to ask any questions of the experts or of your colleagues, now's the opportunity. Do any of you, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one information, Karishma. People have been muted because of noises, so we will just unmute them if they raise the hand.
Okay.
I think Chu Cheng Nan has some point.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, kindly raise the hand. There is a option that you can see. We will unmute you.
Or please type out in the chat box.
So as people are getting used to the technology and writing in their questions, I have a few questions that I thought I'd ask just to get us started. So, you know, Tanawat, you mentioned that there's almost 70 countries by 2016 that have adopted auctions. Seems like it's only gonna get more popular. Barbara, you talked a little bit about, you know, potential ways to maybe avoid transmission congestion. I'm wondering if either of you, in your experience, have you know, seen ways that countries have measures that countries have taken to ensure that some of these awarded projects get built. So, I mean, maybe bid bonds and other things like that, but are there any specific experiences from any country experiences you can talk to?
Yeah, the specific vehicle that you know, I discussed already, like you mentioned, is bid bonds. I have an example of the opposite problem, where in Brazil they basically, just to get comfortable for the investors, they said, okay, we're going to pay you starting at, you know, X date when the project's finished, regardless of whether the project was actually interconnected. So these interconnections were delayed, and therefore these sellers, the winners of the auctions, were in fact getting paid without even having to produce any power. And then the ratepayers ultimately were paying for double power because they were still purchasing from thermal assets. So that was the big lesson learned for Brazil, is to, you know, realize that investors have to do their due diligence on the interconnection risk. and not guarantee that the power is going to be able to flow on date certain. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Wow, that's quite quite a lesson learned.
Right.
Also, for me to share a little bit further from Barbara's experience, most of the follow-ups on the auctions are generally incorporated in the auctions design through what Karishma already mentioned, something like bid bonds and some other mechanism to reduce the risk in terms of project not being implemented, such as requirement qualifications. Those who participate has to meet these certain requirements, reputations, and so on and so forth. However, in the real applications of in case that the winning bidders are not in developing the projects and connecting to the grid, generally in the previous occasion is the second bidder are actually being informed of the status, and they may take over after a certain time frame of being allotted to the first the winning bidder, that they can correct make some corrections to whatever that they could not perform. But if after a certain period of times, then still is issue are being it still remains, then the bidder up next bidder will be provided the opportunity.
Yeah, and with that, you would want to have the bidder who could not perform be excluded from participating in the next round, or for subsequent rounds. But that would be one condition that you could implement with that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. Could be one of those qualification requirements that you are not on one of the so-called blacklisted from the previous round.
Right. Yeah, and just make sure that you've got serious bidders and that they understand the risk of speculation.
In addition to that, I think there are some instances where the penalties are too low, and there's a lot of the bidders taking advantage that they don't mind paying the penalties as long as at the end, like the delays and so on and so forth, the income or whatever the revenue that they generated actually exceeded the penalties that they paid. So this has to be addressed as well.
Right, so it's hard to sort of nail that to the perfect level, but that's a good point. If you make them too low, then they will go ahead and take that risk. If you make them too high, then you're going to limit the competition.
Yes, that's an excellent point. We do have a question, and I think this might be pertinent for a lot of people on the call right now. But in both your experiences, or maybe someone else on the call who's trying to implement renewable energy auctions in their country, what might some of these challenges in auction design be, design and implementation? What are some of these challenges that a country might face when they're first thinking of introducing an auction for renewable energy in their specific countries?
I think that you have to have the regulatory teeth, right? So, I mean, number one is to get buy-in from all the parties, and really in particular the regulator. The regulator is got to make sure that the ratepayer is not going to be by moving down an auction path. So I think the challenge of doing that might be born on a legislative front, right? So if the regulator is tasked with enforcing what's on the books legislatively, then the trick is to make sure that you can, line up the auction with some sort of objective that's set up by legislative policy. And doing work in Colombia, I mean, that was really hard because they don't have any obligation to buy wind and solar power. They have so much hydro that you can't, say, oh, you need to diversify your energy mix based on climate targets. So really they wanted to diversify it because of these El Nino years, these drought years that caused the hydropower to be minimized, and these thermal plants to really have to step in and basically extract a premium for standing by for the 4 non-El Nino years. So anyway, in short, the trick was to develop an auction that would give wind and solar power like a financial vehicle that would make sense, a long-term stream of revenue without actually saying anything about wind and solar, so that they weren't, that they weren't misinterpreting like legislative guidance. So it's kind of walking a fine line, but ended up with that structure of this long-term contract, such that, I mean, the auction hasn't happened yet, it's happening next year, so we'll see how successful it is. But the idea is that these variable renewable energy plants will be the likely winners based on the contract structure from a financing duration angle.
Well, I totally agree with Barbara's, but I would like to add a little bit more. I think there's also 2 additional aspects to consider when a country is trying to implement a renewable energy auction. One of them is, I guess, in a more related to the countries that are just starting implementing renewable energy, is they have to understand that the overall life cycle costs of renewable energy versus more traditional or conventional technology, to at least give them an idea or kind of like an educated view of the actual cost. When you can't just, sometimes you can't compare apple to apple. It's like, for example, the cost of hydro is definitely going to be much lower than the cost for solar. So in order to obtain like a buy-in from the government or from the public sector, they have to understand that in order to promote renewable energy, there's certain additional there's a certain cost that is hidden from the actual just the tariff or the price level that is provided under the hydro or conventional. So as long as they understand the overall life cycle cost of that, they'll be more open and they get more buy-in. So that's the first aspect of it that we've been experiencing. And also additional, one more item to consider as one of the key barriers to overcome is the, I guess, the financing or the bankability issues that related to, when you do an auction. The goal is to have a lot of competition in order to realize the price discovery and also encourage more developments of renewable energy. But if there is not enough and like if there's an issue in terms of financing and bankabilities, that means it provides a higher risk for bid participation or bid for people to actually participate in the auction. So they may have to resolve them into to address it through a higher bid, higher price. So these are the kind of issues that our programs are dealing with that we have to overcome.
Yeah, that was the second one, was what I was going to say. For example, in Kazakhstan, they did move forward with their auction, and they didn't have as much luck as they had hoped, and it was basically, and there's a few reasons, but the shortest answer is that the contract was not financeable. And so they're sort of reworking it now for this next round, and they're being very proactive about it. It's lovely to see. But you need to make sure that you've got some investors who are willing to run with that, or else you will not have the interest. So there's a few places, World Bank, there's a few public contracts out there. There's help from USAID, from Let's GP, but like if you can get some eyes on the contract and make it transparent, make it financeable, that will help for success.
Thank you both. Well, so we have a few minutes left. Okay, so I think Chengnan, do you have a question? Let me.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
This is Chengnan Chu. Thanks for the Anawat and the Paparaz's presentation. I want to share about the Taiwan status of the renewable energy development. I think for promoting and expanding the renewable energy, our government has already set the renewable energy target that will reach to the share of the renewable energy electricity generation to 20% by 2025. I think it is a very ambitious target. So just like the goal of photovoltaic, we will install installation is setting at 20 gigawatt by 2025, and for the offshore wind power is also expand to 5.5 gigawatts also by 2025. I think that besides we have already have the feed-in tariff mechanism, we also have some action for solar PV and offshore wind power. And I think my colleague Gong Jiang will share more detail about this. Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
My name is Go Wen-Jiang from Taiwan, and I would like to share the mechanism for our auction for the offshore wind. For our offshore wind auction, we have two stages. The first one is the selection stage, and the second one is the so-called auction stage. And we just finished the auction stage in this year on June. And we set some qualification for the appliance to attend the offshore auction procedure, and one of the qualifications is that the applicant have to join the selection stage before the auction stage, and the qualification of the applicant will be reviewed in the selection stage, and when the applicants score more than 60 points in the selection stage, then they can join the auction stage. And the volume for our auction stage is about 1.7 gigawatts. And the price of the auction is determined by the applicant, which means who set the lowest price, then who win the bid. And according to our result of the auction, the price of the offshore wind power is about 2.5 NT dollar per kilowatt hour. And I think the challenge for us to design the auction might be one of the challenges might be the how to set like the financial mechanism for the appliance when they to assist them to to have the enough financial to do the project. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Are there any other comments or
That's
questions?
a great price. I'm pretty impressed with that price. So
Yeah.
good luck with bringing those projects to realization. That's fantastic that you've had such movement in this space.
All right. Well, so very quickly, we can still keep taking questions for a few minutes here. I thought I'd wrap up. If ALP team, if you can put up that next step slides while we're still waiting on other questions, I'll just run through some of that. So soon after this session, you'll get a short survey that'll sort of talk about, just ask you a few questions about just this specific session. If you could respond to that, that would be great. In a couple of weeks, so this session brings to a close our online sessions planned for this year. As community of practice participants, as ALP members, you will still have access to tools and resources. We still have, you'll have access to a no-cost technical assistance, like up to 40 hours of expert assistance that's free of cost to your government, to you, as long as you're from a developing country government. And you still have access to case studies and good practices and all these other resources that we will make available. As we start thinking about our activities for next year, we'd love to hear from you what some of your country needs and priorities are moving forward, maybe your top 2 topics that we could focus on. And then also, we'd really like to hear from you how impactful, sort of what you found most useful, the online sessions, the in-person workshops, were the case studies and like sort of toolkit kind of resources most helpful. So to that end, we will be sending out a survey in the next couple of weeks, maybe by mid-November. And we really hope you respond to it so that we're able to best sort of program the activities of this community of practice to meet your needs and priorities. This is a member-driven network, and so we really would be grateful if you could respond to that survey. And with that, we'll have a newsletter that will continue to go out, and we'll continue to send out updates through this mailing list. But if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please don't hesitate to reach us. I think if you go to the next slide, we have some contact information. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone. Are there any last parting thoughts or questions, comments? Okay, great. Well, so I'd once again like to thank all of you for attending. Tanawat and Barbara, thank you so much for your time and expertise. Your presentations were extremely insightful, and the discussion that followed, all the participant input. I think we will be typing up a sort of report based on this session, and it'll be available on the website along with a recording of this session. ALP team, anything else? Nikhil?
Nothing else. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Barbara and Tanawat for your presentations and inputs.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.